Well, good evening to each one. Welcome to each one that's come out this evening. It's good to be here again. It's goed om hier waar zijn en thuis komen, meer te leren. So, welkom iedereen wat gekommen ist. Vielleicht sei ich hier ein paar oben zu was, oder vielleicht als das erste Mal von dir. So, ein paar Announcements hier für von dir Service. Nur das Opening waren ein paar Leiter haben. And then Brother Chester can come up and share after that. And then after that, after the presentation, then like we've had the last couple of evenings, we'll have coffee and fellowship after. And another announcement, so Mr. Weaver is also planning to do a presentation for youth on Sunday at 3:30 p.m. at the Gospel Light Fellowship Church. So all youth are welcome for that. Should be a worthwhile thing, I'm sure. And one more thing, there's a donation box in the back for those that would like to help along with the cost of this event. We would welcome that. And another thing, there are papers in the back for after the presentation, or maybe some of you have them already, but they have on the paper there's just a summary of what he's going to be presenting tonight, as I understood in a way. So feel free to take a copy of that paper after the presentation. And another announcement, I guess we weet nog dat half iedereen van deel, en dat is ik zelf fan, maar met dat weet we dat het blad, so wel we aan denken aan vielleicht het blad niet je bieden te houden, vielleicht after the service met de oppassen en de dingen, ruiken die anderen aan, en dan hebben we steeds vielleicht een beetje reiner houden, so dankzij voor dat. Ja, dat is meer het jet, ik heb dat zei, schijnlijk in de laatste 3 deel, een beetje harten, een beetje aannemen van wat onze voorvaders hebben gedaan, wat die hebben daar gedaan, waarom we zijn waar we zijn, waarom we zijn wer we zijn vielleicht, waar we kunnen zijn. And we have seen how decisions have consequences, and be it good or bad, but decisions have consequences. And we can sit here and maybe we can wonder why they did this or maybe why they did that. But we need to realize that to them, this was real life. And just like the present is real life to us today and the decisions we make. And also another thing is that things often did happen quickly. Oftentimes these things take years. Now we look back and we say, well, why did they make a drastic change? Waarom deed de hastig maar zelfs wat is wat de allemaal heute doen? Aber dat deed vielleicht über Jahren. Und wenn Dinge über Jahren waren, dann konnte ich das sperren, wir haben das einmal gedaan. Und jetzt bis wir sind halt gewarnt geworden und erst bis das wir einmal gehört. Und so da war man auch ein Ding, und aufmerksam sein, dass wir sind Krieg, so leicht, dass wir dort waren down, ist was sie deuten. Für mich selbst, History ist für mich sehr interessant geworden, sehr wertvoll geworden, soll ich sagen, in den letzten Jahren, wenn ich anwort, dass das eine große Ursache, dass wir ans History weiten. There's a purpose that we should know our history. A person that does not know history will be short-sighted to some extent. He will be narrow-minded to some extent because he can't see the. I think someone mentioned here, maybe it was Brother Chester or someone else, that if we have a broader vision, we can walk a narrower path, and that's the way it always is. And I think that's what we all want. We want den schmalen Steg gehen, so viel breiter wie kann checken, so viel schmaler kann wir gehen. Wir wollen das ja sagen, dort du hast die Steg, wo wir gehen, ist schmal. En dat is wat we willen like alle gelegenheid doen. Veel mensen zijn op een weg, maar ze zijn vielleicht niet op een reichen weg. En ik geloof dat we hier toe komen, om maar leren dat we kunnen in schmalen weg gaan. Vielleicht we kunnen leren, een weg de andere weg. Gisteren bracht Chester de point uit dat de Mennoniten, wanneer waren het land gegeven in Rusland, dat die hadden dat verloren, dat the concept of the two kings, they lost that, dat hadden ze verloren. En dat is like zo wichtig. En dat ook, it did not happen overnight. and dat passeerde het niet gauw. It was a progressive thing, and it's sad that as trudig dat het wordt, og ik dan dankbaar ben dat het een mank werden wat en geloven handen. En ik geloof dat het een mank. So for today, as was mentioned yesterday, the topic will be on the bitter end. I think it's the bitter end of the Mennonites that stayed in Russia. And Mr. Weaver warned us that there would not be much positive in the story tonight. And when I thought of that, and when I pondered that, why would we want to listen to a negative message, to a negative story? If we listen to a negative story, and if we listen to mistakes others have made, and if we learn from that, if it causes us to make better decisions, it becomes a positive story for us, because it has a positive end. And we are all making history today. We're in the process of making history. Yesterday is history. And so will our course be changed for the better. There are also many negative stories in the Bible, but we learn from them. And so may that be our heart this evening as we listen to what Mr. Weaver has to share, that we have that heart to learn. Proverbs 20 verse 7 says, "The just man walketh in his integrity, his children are blessed after him." So that's why we want to be people of integrity, that our children, or the people that follow us, will be blessed. I think that's all I had for the opening this evening. So before I give the time to the song leader, let us bow for a prayer. Lord, Father in heaven, we come before you this evening hour. Lord, we are just thankful to be here again. We are thankful to be together as brothers and sisters. Lord, and we are just thankful for your Spirit that rules among men. And may your Spirit be present with us this evening. And may you just grant courage and strength to Mr. Weaver as he shares again. And may we learn with open hearts, and that we may also be better prepared to walk the narrow path like you taught us, Lord Jesus. We pray this in Jesus' name, amen. That'll give the time to the song leader.
Good evening, everyone. First song we'll sing is "Holy God, We Praise Thy Name." Holy God, we praise thy name. Lord of all, we bow before thee. All on earth thy scepter claim. All in heaven above adore thee. Infinite thy vast domain, everlasting is thy reign. Hark the loud celestial hymn, angel choirs above are raising, cherubim and seraphim in unceasing chorus praising, fill the heavens with sweet accord. Holy, holy, holy Lord. Lo, the time to set of sun. Through the church the song goes on. Holy Father, Holy Son, Holy Spirit, three we name thee, while in essence only one, undivided God, we claim thee, and adoring bend the knee, while we sing our praise to thee. Amen. Next song is God's Way is Best. God's way is best if human wisdom a fairer way may seem to show. 'Tis only that our earth-dim vision the truth can never clearly know. God's way is best, I will not murmur, although the end I may not see. Wherever he leads, I'll meekly follow. God's way is best for me. Had I the choosing of my pathway, in blindness I should go astray, and wander far away in darkness, nor reach that land of endless day. God's way is best, I will not murmur, although the end I may not see. Wherever he leads, I'll meekly follow. God's way is best for me. He leadeth true, I will not question, though through the valley I shall go, though I should pass through clouds of trial, and drink the cup of human woe. God's way is best, I will not murmur, although the end I may not see. Wherever he leads, I'll meekly follow. God's way is best for me. Thy way is best, so lead me onward. My all I give to thy control. Thy loving hand will truly guide me, and safe to glory bring my soul. God's way is best, I will not murmur, although the end I may not see. Wherever he leads, I'll meekly follow. God's way is best for me. You may come up, Listener Weaver.
extend a greeting of peace to each of you in preparation for this very, very sad consideration. A few housekeeping things before we start. Some of you have asked me about where your surnames came from, and I did a little research, but you can go online and discover much of this yourself. So as far as Penner, I did some research, and it's possibly Flemish. So it's not my business to go into the details there. You go online and you can check more. I did find more direct information about Giesbrecht. That comes from Prussia, does not come from Holland. And the name Zacharias, it was so incomplete that I really shouldn't say anything. It may even be a Jewish background. I don't know. So you're welcome to search that out further. I would like to ask a question as we get started here. Have you ever heard of a church repenting? You have heard of a church repenting? Good. I've heard of individuals repenting. I would love to talk to you, Philip, about a church repenting. In Revelation, Christ calls churches to repent, but most churches don't repent. But God is not mocked. What he says matters. And if we are obedient, we experience his blessing. But when we decide we know better than God, then we invite his curses on us. And so I must say at the beginning that the following story is not just a bit of suffering or even a wagon load of suffering. The story I'm about to tell is an entire trainload of suffering, lashed with a thunderstorm of tears. I know the story in my mind, but I remember viewing the documentary When They Shall Ask, and I shed tears once again. How many of you have seen that documentary, When They Shall Ask? A number of you here. I would encourage young people especially to see that documentary. The story is tragic beyond description. It's the story of how heaven became hell. Okay, so let's see if we can get some pictures here. Okay. Now, we've been looking at these colonies several times. The first colony is Chortitza, or the old colony. You can see where the arrow goes. And the second is the Malashna colony. Here's the Hutterite. Johann Cornys helped these people set up right here south of the Malashna. And when I talked about Cornelius Jansen being at Berdiansk, right here is Berdiansk. Here's Bergthal. That's a daughter colony of Chortitza. Here's Fürstenland, which is also a daughter colony of Chortitza. And down here, of course, is Crimea. And there were Russian Mennonites we call the Krimmer Brethren down here. Okay, so what we have to say tonight involves this whole area here. And it's not just these colonies that you see. They spread out and multiplied. So the first signs of impending trouble began in 1914. And so after the time that your people left to come to Canada, between that and 1917, we call the Golden Era. One long, continuous, soft summer evening. But in 19 1914, signs of impending trouble began when Russia joined Britain and France to fight Germany in World War I. The Mennonite alternate service work in lieu of military service is not a problem. The Russian Mennonites spoke German, and that was the problem. The Russians suspected that the Mennonites somehow supported the national enemy because they spoke German. Okay, so we need to look at this man. This is actually a German. He's also a Jew. He's a German Jew, and this man invented communism. Communism had not been around before this man. He worked with Frederick Engels, and I don't have a picture of Frederick Engels. And so the Bolshevik revolution was based on ideas that he gave, and that meant that you overthrew the Tsar. This is the last Tsar of Russia. This is Tsar Nicholas II and his wife Alexandra and their 5 children. It's a tragic story of what happened to those people. That's not my message tonight. Long story short, this man and his family were deposed and killed. For a long time, they didn't know where they got killed, but now they know. You can go there today. So what led to this rise of communism? Why did they want to put Karl Marx's ideas to work in Russia? Okay, the czars represented privilege, and the peasants were at the bottom. And when you have class difference like that, you're inviting revolution. And that's eventually what happened. Communism is saying we have a classless society. Everybody has the same. No top, no bottom. Everybody the same. Okay? That's supposed to be the way it is, but it never works that way. Some people have to run this system. And so they're the people above, and human nature being what it is, those people selfishly take riches and power to themselves. How many of you sitting here have read the book Animal Farm, which is by George Orwell? Raise your hands high. Only 2 of you. I'm glad you too have read it. It's an allegory that shows a farm, and the pigs are the illustration, are the communists who took over, and there's certain pigs in there that are certain communist leaders, and it doesn't say who is who, but you understand history, you can see which pigs are which. Okay? So if you're a high school student or beyond, I would suggest that you read Animal Farm by George Orwell sometime. All right, back to this story. So once communism is considered, you get a political party. And the particular form of this party was called Social Democratic Party. It was established in 1898. And in 1903, it split into 2 groups. One group, now think, these are all communist. One group was the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, and this is him. And the other group, oh, by the way, this particular group understood that they need to seize power by force through strikes and violent demonstrations. And Lenin understood that most people don't get communism. They think in terms of capitalism or free enterprise, and they need a little help to understand what's really true. And so you probably have to kill a few people till the people get the point. Well, that was more than just a few people till the people got the point. And some people believed in the system and other people did not. But eventually they forced this whole system on Russia. Okay, so there was another group, communists, called the Mensheviks. And these people believed in the gradual reform of society. Well, the Bolsheviks were won out. And Lenin had been a hero such that after he died in 1924, they embalmed him and put him in a casket with a glass case. And up until in my lifetime, people would stand in line and view his body. He was almost like a god to the Russians, this man right here. And there he is, leading the Bolshevik Revolution. Now, if you read Animal Farm, you find this man. They're not going to call him by name. This is Leon Trotsky. This guy is a Jew. He was a communist mass murderer. He didn't think you just kill a few people. You ought to kill a bunch of people till people understand what's going on. This says that he first invented the term racist. He defined racism as loving your people. Now think about that. Racism is loving your people. And if you didn't get communism in this version of loving your people, you're backwards. You're opposing the good. And the good is a global communist dictatorship. The communists can run the whole world. And everything will be better. Okay, so what are you going to do if you have people like Leon Trotsky and you also have Lenin? Well, you have power struggles. And if you read Animal Farm, you see how the power struggles work. One day, one leader just disappears. You can't have two guys at the top. One of them has to go. So Trotsky was disposed of, and Lenin took over. Lenin and his communist cronies took over Russia. He promised dramatic reforms that would benefit the urban poor. Some Mennonite intellectuals supported the idea of greater justice. These are the people who did not have the two-kingdom doctrine in mind. They thought that you solve these kinds of problems politically. And so, believe it or not, some Mennonites actually supported the Bolshevik ideas, the communist ideas. But it soon became clear that Lenin wanted to destroy religion as part of his classless society ideal. As you know, communism is based on an atheistic worldview. God does not exist. And it was understood that religion is the opiate of the people. I can't take time to get on a bunny trail there. So you really need to get rid of religion. Suddenly, Russia made peace with Germany in 1918. This is the end of World War I. As part of the peace deal, German soldiers would occupy Ukraine, where most of the Mennonites lived. The Mennonites were doubly glad. War was over, and the Germans were coming to maintain law and order. But the Russian natives noticed. They were more sure than ever that Mennonites were Russian traitors. Then the tide turned quickly when Britain and France defeated Germany. The German soldiers needed to go back to Germany. But the German soldiers warned the Mennonites before they left that the Russian peasants would take revenge against the German-speaking people. And so, before they left, they taught some Mennonite young men how to defend themselves with weapons, how to use guns. And so when the Germans left, Ukraine was left in a vacuum. Law and order broke down. Russians began to rob Mennonite farms and kill the landowners. But they didn't stop there. And this is part of the tragedy. Let me give you one little story right now. In 1919, bandits killed David and Katharina Dick, founders of the Mennonite Tract Society, in spite of their reputation for generosity. These are good people, but they got killed anyway. From there, if if you can kill good people, what's to stop you from killing anybody? And so anarchy and chaos erupted as the new Soviet Union descended into civil war. And the White Army was fighting to reinstate the Tsar. The Red Army fought to keep the Bolsheviks, or the communists, in power. And the battleground was Ukraine, right where the Mennonites lived, as the army swept across the land through village after village, destroying property, confiscating food, and leaving the helpless inhabitants with little of their own. On top of that, there was a third group of anarchists, people who believed in no government. And these people fought only to loot, to steal, and create havoc as they pillaged the landscape. Their black flag carried the words, "Anarchy is the mother of all order." Okay, so I'm going to skip past this next slide and go to this man. This is Makhno. This is the bandit leader. And there's a statue honoring him and his men right there. That's a photograph of it. Of all the Red Army, the White Army, and the bandits, the Mennonites feared this group the most. He was familiar with Mennonites, possibly having worked for a Mennonite farmer. And Makhno led 100,000 men in their lawless terrorism. He and his men were cunning and ruthless. They would appear out of nowhere to kill, rob, rape, and steal, often in the middle of the night. So do you folks have this book in your libraries, or are you familiar with it, A Russian Dance of Death? Is this familiar? Raise your hand if you're familiar with this. Only one of you. Okay, so this is a very graphic. It'll work on you. This story, I can't be too gory. There are children here, okay? But this book, and then there's a children's book called Days of Terror by Barbara Smucker that give you some of the stories here. And I have another book here, Mennonites in the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union. Part 3 talks about this part of the story. So you can read it if you have a good stomach and if you're not going to bed right away. Khortytsa, old colony. Your people are gone by now. That the people who stayed suffered 400, including children, killed. 92 women raped. 16 villages burned to the ground. Then a typhus epidemic struck, killing 1,200 more. The survivors faced starvation because the bandits had taken 113 horses, 1,717 cows, 1,073 hogs, 40,000 bushels of wheat, 10,000 bushels of barley. The discouraged living buried the dead in mass graves. Let me just pause here to find some more pictures. This is 5 members of the Thyssen family murdered during this time. And there's a mass grave. With the revolution, in too many of our Mennonite cemeteries appeared the mass grave. In some of them, as many as 60 brothers and sisters cruelly murdered, all buried in one pile. This one is found in the village of Blumenort, Malashna. Okay, so the top picture on the left there says, in the winter, dead bodies were piled like logs. In spring, they were dumped into common graves without much ado. No one bothered to find the names of the dead. They just dumped them in the pile. At the bottom, there's a picture of an entire family who was killed, except you see the 2 people standing there? The mother was not killed. It's the father and all the children, except the girl you see at the end. there was another lady. Let me see if I can read what it says here. Jacob Enns from the village something, living in poor houses, as shown in the photo there, was murdered. So were his 3 daughters, as well as Miss Kremer, who happened to be spending the night with the Enns family. The 4th daughter, shown in the photo, would have been murdered too, but she had not been. But she had she not been able to hide herself from the murderers. So maybe that is the mother. This was the way it was. And these are just a few of the pictures that are available. And it's not for children to look at all this stuff. And there's more. I have some other books at home. Another book is called Miracles of Grace and Judgment. This has been well documented. The Mennonite young men who had learned how to handle weapons from the Germans decided this is enough. They got to do something. You can't stand still and let these bandits come in and kill your family, steal your food, steal your crops, steal your animals. You got to do something. And so they decided they're going to take up these arms and intervene. The church leaders agonized over what to tell the young men. Everyone lived in fear. No one had ever lived in a situation of chaos like this before. No government existed, only roaming, undisciplined armies. The church leaders could not bless defense units, so they finally left the matter with the individual consciences of the young men. These young men formed Selbstschutz, or self-defense units, using the weapons and ammunition left by the vacating Germans. And the Lutheran and Catholic German colonies did the same thing. At first, the Mennonite militia seemed successful in the Malashna area. But the Mennonite militia was soon outnumbered and outgunned. Machno and his bandits focused their brutality on the people who had compromised their professed values. Now think about that. The people who had not resisted them were treated at least a little better than the people who took up arms. These people professed to be non-resistant, but when it came right down to it, they were willing to take up arms, and Machno focused on them. And we understand why. The compromisers were targeted for revenge. Furthermore, some Mennonites had mistakenly fought the Red Army, which is the Bolsheviks. Now the communists could claim that the Mennonites were enemies of the state. A Red Army general angrily told the Mennonites, "You claim to be non-resistant when it comes to fighting for your country, but you become resistant to defend your own possessions." What can you say? It's true. However, most Mennonites did not take up arms. The Civil War had shattered the Mennonite colonies. The horses and cattle were gone. The crops and grain were gone. On top of these miseries, it seemed as if God himself increased the suffering by bringing drought and dreadful famine into the land. First, the children died, and the old people died, and then the ones in between. Many Mennonites felt like the judgment of God was falling on them. And as I said, this particular book chronicles this story. Let me read to you what it says. This particular book is a story of terror and brutality, of murder, plunder, and suffering. Willa Cather, noted American writer, said, "I cannot doubt that it is the story of an actual experience. It has made me realize the terribleness of the Russian Revolution more vividly than anything else I have read. In 1920, the Russian Mennonites sent 4 young men to visit Mennonites in Europe, further west, and to go to North America to report this terrible story. And when the Mennonites in America and in the West heard about this, the response was immediate. Canadian and North American Mennonites sent food and supplies for the suffering, as well as set up Mennonite Central Committee to coordinate their work. So I have a picture that comes from that time period. There it is. This is an American MCC relief kitchen. And these MCC fed thousands of people, probably saved people from dying of starvation. But MCC could not freely do its work until 1921 because of the reigning chaos. A government relief agency named the American Relief Administration assigned MCC to the Mennonite area of Ukraine. For 3 years, MCC distributed food to 75,000 people, mostly Mennonite, saving thousands from starvation. And again, this is just brief. You can read more about that in other sources. By 1924, the Red Army had gained control, bringing the Civil War and anarchy to an end. Once again, the farms began to produce, and MCC emergency feeding program began. One little note here. When MCC first got there, Ori Miller, Arthur Schlegel, and Clayton Kratz, all Swiss Mennonites, were sent over to investigate to get this food in. Well, Clayton Kratz somehow got behind the red lines and was never heard from again. And that story is chronicled in the Christian Light Perspectives of Life and Literature. All right, now we're going to back up here a little bit. Okay, what you see here, this was a conference in 1925. We're past the Civil War, the Russian Civil War now. In 1924, Lenin died. And so again, there's another struggle for power. And this man came to power. His name is Joseph Stalin. This man was willing not just to kill a few, this man ended up killing 20 million of his own people. He killed more people than the Holocaust, the Jewish Holocaust. For some reason, we are fixated on the Jewish Holocaust. But this man did more. And if that wasn't enough, communism went to China, and Mao Zedong killed at least 60 million people of his own people. It just boggles the imagination. This man died the year I was born. A most brutal person. Okay, so now we're going to look at the terror that begins under this man. As the communists took over the government, they also took over the farmlands to form collectives. Communism says everybody needs to be treated the same. So instead of having individual farms, we're going to put all the farms in a certain area together. We'll have that as a collective. And then you have bosses on the collective that tell people what to do. And it's supposed to be a better way. Okay, so those of you who understand how business works, it was anything but a better way. But I won't go into all that right now. So At least they were able to start farming again. And so once again, the farms began to produce crops. And the emergency feeding program by MCC ended. But with these collectives, now we're under communism and atheism, and religion is out of the picture. And so under these collectives, children still need to be educated, but they're running the schools, and the schools are atheistic. And they promote atheism in their schools. And atheism is the belief that there's no God. So what are the Mennonites supposed to do? Let their children go to school where they learn atheism? They were put up against the hard wall. At the same time, the communist government began to round up church leaders and to send them into exile in Siberia. So who did they pick up? All right. Mennonites, because they're good business people, were known as kulaks. Along with the collectivization came the persecution of the kulaks, a class of prosperous landowning peasants. The kulaks, who did not give up their property, were arrested and deported, and in some cases executed. They became the scapegoats of collectivization. You didn't have any choice. If they came and wanted your farm, you better not resist them, because they will shoot you on the spot. The kulaks were the landowning peasants, that's including your people now, or your relatives who stayed in the Soviet Union, who did not want their farms to be collectivized after the revolution. They did not want anybody around who really knew how to farm. People were put in control as a place of position. And these collective farms did not do very well. And I can't explain all of this, but from 1929, Stalin began to exterminate these people, the kulaks, as a class, just kill off the kulaks. Stalin had this idea, men make problems. No men, no problems. Instead of fixing problems, just kill them. So execution and forced starvations of the peasants happened during the Civil War. We looked at that. And we have the period of war, communism, in reaction to the economic crisis. People don't like their farms taken from them, so they resist. But the peasants, regardless, were forced to produce grain for the benefit of the state. But they couldn't produce grain because they didn't have the equipment and the grain to do it. But they're still supposed to do it. They were in an impossible situation. Many peasants refused to sell grain to the state for the fixed price. And so Lenin, this is back before Stalin now, responded by sending the Cheka to execute speculators who purchased grain from the peasants and sold it on the black market. Anybody who could make money on this, just execute them. Here's a picture of the three. Lenin's on the left, Stalin's in the right, and that's Mao Zedong, the Chinese leader, communist leader. Okay, so how many of you have read the book, The Gulag Archipelago? I did not bring a copy of that. On the way here, I saw somebody reading it at the airport. Have any of you read this? Okay. This Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote this, and he smuggled his book out. And when the West read this, in my lifetime, then this whole thing was exposed. The communists did a good job of covering up all the stuff that they had been doing, including the Gulag. And the Gulag was work camps up in Siberia where they sent people to. It's mind-boggling what the Russians were willing to do, and then to cover it up so nobody would ever find out what they did. So here's what Solzhenitsyn said. You must understand, the leading Bolsheviks who took over Russia were not Russians. They hated Russians. They hated Christians. Driven by ethnic hatred, they tortured and slaughtered millions of Russians without a shred of human remorse. If you read the book, you'll understand why he says that. It cannot be overstated. Bolshevism committed the greatest human slaughter of all time. I would put a caveat there, unless you compare it to Mao Zedong in China. The fact that most of the world is ignorant and uncaring about this enormous crime is proof that the global media is in the hands of the perpetrators. So this book opened up a window into what the Soviets had been doing. They got exposed in spite of trying to cover this thing up. So the Gulag Archipelago is a profound and harrowing account of the Soviet Union's forced labor camp system, revealing the depths of human suffering and resilience under totalitarianism. And you just wonder how people could survive. And when you find yourself in a situation like this, human beings sort themselves out really quickly. Some people are all about me. And if you're focused on yourself, you soon die. But when you focus on blessing other people, you probably live a little longer. This Gulag Archipelago, written by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, is a monumental work that chronicles the brutal realities of the Soviet labor camp system from 1918 to 1956. Drawing from his own experiences as a prisoner and extensive interviews with fellow inmates. He didn't make this up. This is based on his own experience. Solzhenitsyn exposes the mechanisms of repression and the moral dilemmas faced by individuals under a totalitarian regime. And I cannot take time here to explain all that. The book I held up here, Path of Thorns, this man, Jacob Neufeld, was in one of these Gulag camps for 5 years, and he survived it. And he writes also the stuff that he experienced in these Gulag camps. Okay, so the men are sent off. The business leaders are sent off. People are dying. Who stays home? The women stay home, and the children stay home. And the women have to do the work. They couldn't do it, but they had to. There's no other choice. And boys, like 14. If dad was taken off, the young man at 14 has to be the head of the family. You probably have stories from some of your relatives about how this all was at this time. Okay, so by the time this is happening, the Mennonites wanted to leave Russia, because Russia had become the land of nightmares. And between 1923 and 1929, a 6-year period, this is under communism now. This is just after Lenin dies and Stalin comes into control. 22,000 Mennonites emigrated to Canada. And this particular picture that you see right here is highlighted in this book, When They Shall Ask. When the Mennonites came to this gate, once they passed to the other side, they were free. Up until this time, if they were caught, they could be taken back, and who knows what's going to happen to them. Just since I'm here, someone told me a story of a woman and her children. The father had disappeared, and she went on a train. I don't know if it's at this gate or what. She just hoped she could find her husband. But instead of going through, she told her children she needs to find her husband. So she turned back and was never heard from again. That happened time and time and time again. That is the gate which the Mennonites passed through when they left Soviet Union. And this was an entrance into Latvia, the country of Latvia. And there's another picture of it. It's the boundary line for freedom. This particular picture is back to the revolution when all the people were doing all the killing. And that particular area that you see here, this particular Eichenfeld, I think it's this place right here. This is where some of those pictures came from. That was a particularly hard-hit village. But every place that you see a cross is a place the bandits attacked. Notice this is all surrounding the old colony of Khortytsa. These are destroyed Mennonite villages where you see this symbol. And when this symbol is Ukrainian village. And so, in this time period, a bunch of Mennonites got out. And there you can see people standing at the train cars. The people in the train cars, the people who made it out, probably never saw the people who are on the ground there again. The people on the ground died. But by 1929, the communists were closing the gates. In 1929, after Stalin left a bunch of these people out, he slammed the door shut and said, no more. And at the same time, the Canadian government also needed to end the exodus because the Great Depression had come to both Canada and the United States. The United States was not taking people, Canada was not taking people. And so 80,000 Mennonites would remain behind, unable to leave. For them, their misery and sorrow was just beginning and will continue for many long years. But hope springs eternal in the human breast. 70 desperate Mennonites fleeing famine and a heavy government hand in Siberia one day showed up in Moscow, trusting somehow that they might be permitted to leave. And wonder of wonders, the Soviet government left those 70 out and left them emigrate. The news spread like wildfire among the Mennonites, quietly to avoid suspicion, and in such haste that they just left property behind. About 1,000 Mennonite families showed up in Moscow, somehow hoping the Dutch or American Mennonites would rescue them. And more followed until 14,000 people had hurried to Moscow, hoping to somehow emigrate. And to make their desires public, they demonstrated in Moscow's Red Square. The Soviet Union had boasted to the world that it was the freest country in the world. But the economic conditions and general dissatisfaction belied the claim. The free world press delighted to publish the irony of so many people wanting to get out. And the Soviet government was embarrassed. So in response, the communist authorities herded the unwilling Mennonites into freight train cars and sent them back to Ukraine or exiled them to Siberia. They gave no regard for food, clothing, or sanitation. Families became separated, some shipped to one place and some to another. Some became sick because of exposure and neglect. Back east, they were worse off than they had been before they left, with no household furniture, no farm equipment, and no livestock. Many found their homes occupied by strangers. Life was now harder than ever. But the Western free world had gotten the story. The German government intervened with President von Hindenburg, which is in Germany, who donated 200,000 marks from his own private fortune to help with this emigration. Germany agreed to take 6,000 refugees, 4,000 of them Mennonites. And to counter the negative press that they're getting, the communists finally allowed 4,000 Mennonites to emigrate. 1,000 went to Brazil, 2,000 went to Paraguay, and the rest to relatives in Canada. And as I said, the door slammed shut, and that was 1929. They want to get out, but they can't really go west, so they decided to try east. And so in their desperation, some Mennonites went to East Russia to a location near China. It's called Harbin, China, near Harbin, China. From this location, they hoped to cross the river Amur, A-M-U-R, into China. In 1930, in a daring nighttime move, an entire village of 217 Mennonites crossed the frozen Amur River on 16 sleds in temperatures near 40 degrees below zero. From China, these Mennonites moved to Reedley, California, or to Brazil, or to Paraguay. And that's all told in a book entitled River of Glass. I did not bring a copy of that with me. Let me read to you a story of what was like over this time when Stalin was working to purge his Russia. This is just a story from this book, and this is just a typical story. It was September 1937. This is during Stalin's time. The family had gone to bed, hoping that they would be spared what had happened to so many of their relatives and friends in the last few weeks. Nicholas, a veterinarian, was a useful and productive citizen on the collective farm, but that did not guarantee him safety. Officials had recently imprisoned his father, an expert horticulturalist, on trumped-up charges. Then after midnight, the family heard a loud knock on the window and a voice demanding that the door be opened. Anna turned to her husband and murmured, "Now they've come to get you." She dressed and began to sob quietly. Nicholas got up, lit a lamp, dressed, and opened the house door. 2 secret policemen entered and ordered Nicholas to go with them. They searched drawers for documents and valuables, including mail from relatives in North America. It was a crime to have connections with a foreign country. When they finished, they took Nicholas by his arms and led him to the door. Nicholas turned to say goodbye to Anna and the children. He stopped at the bed of his 6-year-old son and whispered, "My dear boy, perhaps I'll never see you again. Be good to Mother and help her as much as you can." Anna was weeping uncontrollably. One of the policemen said, "Don't cry. Your husband will soon be back." Anna snapped, "Don't give me that. I know how he will return. He'll never come back." The door closed, and Anna and her children heard a car drive away. The children never saw their father again. During the next few weeks, Anna was permitted to visit her husband in the local prison, taking him food and clothing. One day, Nicholas returned his shoes, telling Anna that he did not need them anymore. When Anna examined them at home, she found the inside soaked with blood. Guards had tortured Nicholas until he had agreed to sign a confession that he had poisoned the cattle on the collective farm. Anna never saw her husband after that. Nicholas and his father, the horticulturalist, were both shot shortly thereafter. Thousands of Soviet citizens were exiled to harsh prison labor camps known as the Gulag in Siberia. Somewhere between 40 and 60 million died in Stalin's prison camps. I was very conservative and I said 20 million. This book says between 40 and 60 million. Boggles our mind. And these cars that would show up in the middle of the night were known as the Black Raven. And everybody knew that someday a Black Raven would stop at their house to get their father. And when that happened, they may never see their father again. And you wives, you can just imagine how that would be. Okay, so that's the 30s. Now in 1939, World War II begins. In 1941, that's 2 years after the war begins, Nazi Germany invades the Soviet Union, pushing east, and soon occupied much of Ukraine, where thousands of Mennonites still lived. Old people, crippled people, but women and children trying to survive. The Mennonites were overjoyed with the German presence. The Nazis allowed churches to reopen, and the Mennonites quickly reopened their schools. But the Mennonites noted that the Nazis were killing Jews. They didn't know what to do about that. These are Germans who are killing Jews. 2 years later, the tide of the war turned. Russian armies began to chase the Nazis back out of Russia. Some Mennonites saw their chance to escape the Soviet Union and fled to Germany earlier, but most joined a mass movement of Germans trying to escape ahead of the retreating German Nazi army, pushed west by the Russian army. And I have some pictures here. This is what it looked like. And this book, Path of Thorns, participated in this. Here's another picture. It's the women and children, a few old men and boys that are making this trip. Here's a young Russian Mennonite woman leaving Russia. Notice the mud. Here's a better looking picture. I understand that those men in the background are Mennonite men going west. They're retreating west ahead of the Russian army. Many women became the heroes, women of courage and faith. I have a copy of this book here, Mennonite Exodus. This is the rescue and resettlement of the Russian Mennonites since the Communist Revolution. There are 3 books in your series. It's Mennonites in Canada, book 1 and book 2, and then it's Mennonite Exodus. This is not your story. This is the story of the people, of your relatives who stayed in Russia. The people who came out under Stalin and the people that Lenin left out in the 1920s before he died were called Russlander Mennonites. And many of them came to the West, like to Vancouver. Maybe some of you know some of these people who came over in the 1920s. Okay, now in the World War II, this picture is of German officers looking at the German civilians who had not fled when Soviet troops invaded East Prussia in 1944. And I have more to say about that tomorrow. This is one of the most awful, awful times. Russian soldiers are not known for mercy. The book, I'll be talking about this tomorrow, A Place for Ruth, happened over this time. It's like human beings turned into brutes. So, when they came through Prussia, the place where they had lived before they came to Russia, they destroyed the Mennonite presence. Completely destroyed it. The only thing that's left are these buildings. There's a church house used as a storage place. And there you see at the graves at the bottom, Bernhard Franzen daughter murdered by the Russians in 1945. That's all that's left. There are no Mennonites there today. This used to be the most populated Mennonite concentration in the world, most densely populated. Completely gone. In the cold of winter, many children and old people simply died on this journey west that I showed you with those wagons. About 35,000 refugees did reach Germany. But then right at the end of the war, the Russian army overtook the Nazi army and caught up with these fleeing refugees. And when the Soviets caught up with them, they rounded up 23,000 of these Mennonites and sent them back to Russia. They had almost gotten to freedom. 23,000 sent back. Another 12,000 escaped into the West. The part of Germany that was occupied by the British or American forces, and there the refugees waited in refugee camps supplied by MCC to see if any country would take them. Eventually, 6,000 were allowed into Canada, and 6,000 were allowed into South America, mostly to Paraguay. And Henry's Red Sea, that book, I did not bring a copy of that, that's a children's book, took place at this time. And that was also a part of the story, A Path of Thorns. Now, one of the places these people moved was to Uruguay. And my daughter and her family moved to Uruguay, and she had a medical emergency, and so we went down, and I asked the leaders there if I could visit some of these Mennonite Nazis who fled to Uruguay. And so they graciously took me to visit a John Clausen family. He could not speak English. He could speak Spanish, I guess Plattdeutsch, but I don't know that either. And so he translated for me, and they told him why I was there. And what I wanted to see is what kind of attitudes does a former Mennonite Nazi have? And when he met us, he was most gracious and asked us in for a meal, and we talked, and he said that his mother told him that those kinds of attitudes are not right. And it heartened me to know we're painting with broad brush here. There were some people, you couldn't be very vocal about it, did not pick up on those kinds of bad attitudes. It might have been prevalent in most, but not all. This is a picture of 7 siblings who were separated sometime or other in this story. For 23 years, these siblings believed that each other was dead. That's a Malashna family, a farmer's family, when World War II began. And here's what happened to them. The father was torn from the family. The mother and small children were dumped into the empty steppes of Kazakhstan, where she and 2 of the youngest children died during the winter. The oldest son eventually became an engineer. The oldest daughter escaped to Canada. One daughter became a member of a collective in Siberia. 2 children survived hard labor in a coal mine and today are trained specialists. 2 children raised in an orphanage. One became a teacher and the other a metallurgist. But they thought everybody else had died, and they discovered each other. It's like nobody tried to keep anybody together. It wasn't important. Human beings were not valued. Here's some more families of the refugees. The bottom picture is a picture of Mennonite refugees from the Soviet Union. And we're going to close up with this story. For more than 40 years after World War II, thousands of Mennonites who had not been killed continued to live in the Soviet Union under harsh conditions. Some joined Baptist churches. Almost all lost their Mennonite identification. But every cloud has a silver lining when the sun is shining. In the 1980s, remarkable changes began to happen in the Soviet Union as the communist government lost its grip on power and began to allow people of German background to leave. Between 1987 and 1993, almost 100,000 people of Mennonite origin left the Soviet Union to resettle in Germany. This movement of people has been the largest Mennonite migration in history. The newcomers to Germany are called the Umsiedler. Interestingly, the Umsiedler are finding it difficult to feel comfortable in Germany, where materialism and a sex-obsessed media hold sway. They note that many people are only nominally Christian. That means Mennonites meet Mennonites, and the one, through persecution, had been refined, and the other had not learned their lesson. I'm going to tell you tomorrow in a presentation that many, or probably most Mennonites who became Nazis never repented. And how can you have those two groups of people fellowship? You couldn't. So this is a picture of Umsiedler. At church, singing is a major part of their worship. They prefer the old hymns of their past rather than the light, shallower contemporary music. And if you watch the documentary, When They Shall Ask, you listen to these people sing. And when you hear them sing, something touches your heart because it connects with the spirit that you and I have. It's really, really precious. For these people, life is no longer about the golden age of financial, social, and cultural prosperity. For them who have been purified by suffering, today is a golden age of faith. And today, as we speak, the Russian Mennonite story has ended. There are very few people of German Mennonite ancestry in the Soviet Union at all. And now, once again, the lands of Khortytsa and Malashna are the scene of war and suffering, as I mentioned last night. But this time, the Mennonites are gone. Let me show a few more slides in conclusion. I don't know if you can see this or not, but this is Germany. Here's Switzerland. And over here is Luxembourg. Here's Belgium. Up here's the Netherlands. These Umsiedler are concentrated right here and right here, even more so. Since I'm not of your people, I don't have as many stories, but I know some of those people have gone to Mexico. And I'm not qualified to speak further on that. Okay, so there's a picture of a church house in 1914, and the bottom picture is the same church house in 2000. It's gone. Previous Mennonite church buildings in Russia falling into disrepair. There's no Mennonites there anymore. There you see a former Mennonite church. That picture was taken in the year 2000. And my last slide, this is the arrest photo of Jacob Reimer, a victim of Stalin's Great Purge. The mysteries surrounding his identity and what his family was told about him are detailed in a book. It Happened in Moscow, a memoir of discovery by Marian Klassen. I'm only mentioning a few of the many books that are available. Let me read what it says about Jacob Reimer. That's his arrest photo. For decades, the fate of their grandfathers was a mystery. They were the victims of what's known as the Great Purge, some of the more than 9,000 German Mennonites arrested in Ukraine from 1936 to 1938 during the Soviet leader Joseph Stalin's ethnically motivated persecution. Scooped up in the middle of the night by the Russian NKVD, the Black Raven, their predecessor of the Soviet KGB, the men were arrested on the pretense of treason and were never heard from again. But your people had gotten out, and your people were spared this. Thank you for your attention. Does anybody have any questions you want to ask before I sit down? Yes. Now repeat that question again, please. Okay, the two kingdom doctrine says that Jesus has his kingdom. The Constitution is the Sermon on the Mount, And that kingdom lives by Jesus' principles. The kingdom of this world is all about selfishness and living for oneself. Get what you can for yourself. The kingdom of Christ is, what can I do for you? I give to you. I love God and I love my neighbors. It's all about blessing other people. I move out from myself. The kingdom of this world is all about what I can get for myself. And I protect my property, and I get as much money as I can, and I'm willing to hurt you. I'm willing to step on you if it helps me rise. Is that enough? There's more that could be said. That's just brief. Anything else? Mennonite Nazis? Okay, so that's my presentation for tomorrow night. And come, please understand, it's going to be a long evening. It's 2 45-minute sessions separated by a little break. I try to thoroughly tell that story. In a nutshell, when Hitler came to power, the Mennonites in Germany loved him and supported him all the way through. It's called The Mennonite Nazi Story. And the book that I brought, I had on the table for the first night, is what happened as a result of what I'm going to show you tomorrow night. Is that enough for now?
I believe so, yeah. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they were a Nazi.
Yes, they were. They actually became Nazis and became officers. They supported the Nazi ideology. Hitler held them up as prize specimens. This is the perfect Aryan race. You folks, with your pure blood, Hitler would have loved you. You were the people he's looking for. But that's tomorrow night. Okay? Thank you very much for your attention.
Yes, well, thank you, Brother Chester, for sharing again tonight. Very worthwhile. And one thing that you mentioned that stuck out to me was the comment that the golden era of, I'm not exactly sure how it was worded, but the golden era of, like we had in the last couple days, the golden era of financial prosperity had turned into the golden era of faith and believing, and so that's what the purpose of suffering is, and so that's why it can have a good ending, right? So that's very good. And yeah, one thing I thought about was we sure don't have any reason to be unthankful as a people today, right? When you listen to a story like that. So yes, thank you very much. And like was mentioned, tomorrow again, there's the story on the Mennonite Nazis, which might be a longer evening, not sure exactly how long, but you're welcome to come for that again tomorrow. And yeah, just once again, there's those papers in the back for those that want a summary of what was shared tonight. So with that, you are dismissed, and once again, we have coffee, and feel free to stay for fellowship as long as you like. With that, you're dismissed. Thank you.